My name is Norm Volsky, your host, and this is the Digital Health Heavyweights Podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Digital Health Heavyweights Podcast with your host, Norm Volsky. Today, I'm honored to introduce our guest for the day, the CEO and founder of Virta Health, Sami Inkinen.
Norm, well, thank you so much for having me here. Excited to chat with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, welcome to the show. I believe this is our 8th or 9th episode, and would love to just jump in, straight with questions. Walk me through your experience co-founding a very, successful company in Trulia in the real estate business, and what you learned from that rocket ship that helped you today scaling Virta into the, company that's worth billions of dollars today.
Yeah, so for those perhaps younger listeners who don't even know what Trulia is, it's an online real estate marketplace that still exists about, I guess it's 18 years after founding, and now it's part of the Zillow Corporation. But if you go to Trulia.com, you can find homes for sale, you can sell your home, you can find homes for rent. So I guess a little bit of background. So I grew up in Finland and I immigrated to America 2003 to go to Stanford Business School. But really the reason I wanted to go to Stanford Business School wasn't that I wanted to further educate myself after having done, I guess, masters in physics, but I wanted to come to Silicon Valley. So that was my dream. So my North Star was, if you're an actor or actress, you probably want to go to Hollywood. And, I grew up in Finland. I was an entrepreneurially minded person. Silicon Valley was my Hollywood. And I just wanted to try to figure out how to get to America. And the business school was the way to get into America. And so the 2 years that I was at Stanford, I just had a very single-minded goal. I want to build something, anything really, with sort of a technology foundation. And so how did Trulia came about? Well, I got lucky in that another immigrant, another physicist, another person from Europe, another one of my classmates, Pete Flint, we together sort of stumbled on this idea that you can find a spouse, you can find a car, you can find a trip online, but there really wasn't a consumer-oriented internet destination for homes for sale and homes for rent online. So this may now sound like, seriously? Well, like, how old are you? 100 years old? Not quite, but this
was revolutionary at the time.
So it was 2003, 2004. And so we teamed up and, before we even left Stanford, started building the company Trulia. And so that's kind of how it came about. And so one key driver for me was I just had this burning, unexplainable desire to build something or create something. And I had started one company in Europe. And so that was the driver, sort of a blind, unexplainable driver inside of me, and why I ended up co-founding Trulia. But I've sometimes jokingly said that, yeah, we were a real estate marketplace, but it could have been a pet food company or selling pet food online. The industry or the product or the idea really did not play much anything in my mind. It was just this burning desire to build something. And I guess that's your kind of follow-up question was, what have I learned for my current role? And I would say this one thing I got right previous time, and I feel now as well, which is if you start something as an entrepreneur, start a company, I think the most important thing that you become obsessed about something at such a deep level that you can't even explain. Whatever the driver is, fear, love, and for me with Trulia, I just wanted to build something as an immigrant in Silicon Valley, and it felt amazing to be able to do that. And it motivated me to kind of, run through fire and walls and whatnot. And so I think that's one of the more important things if you're contemplating starting anything, that you don't want to have a spreadsheet analysis and say, hey, here's the best business opportunity. Maybe I should dedicate 20 years of my life into this. Like, no. Like, you have to fall in love with something in an unexplainable way, which then carries you over all the craziness, the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur. And we can talk about more, but let me just pause there.
Well, I can say with certainty that, if Silicon Valley was your Hollywood, after your experience and success at both Trulia and now at Virta, you'll have your, star on the Walk of Fame, of Silicon Valley if they ever build one. So you've accomplished everything you set out to do, which, is just amazing and has to be incredibly rewarding. So kind of walk me through kind of the experience you gained in getting Trulia to an exit and just how that helps you in your current situation at Virta where, big valuation, there's big expectations of a potential exit at some point.
Yeah, well, you did mention this word exit, and I guess in a traditional sense, Trulia was very successful in that we had a successful IPO, and
Yes.
then year or two after IPO, merged with Zillow Group, and it was a multi-billion-dollar transaction. So we were fortunate to be able to deliver amazing return to all our investors and employees and so forth. However, I would say yes, Trulia was a phenomenal life experience. But the reason I consider it very successful is that still today, 18 years after starting the company, actually, I don't know the exact number, but I can say that tens of millions of Americans use the product and find value out of it. And then obviously we've created a lot of jobs and kind of benefits to many constituents. So the IPO itself, I still consider, and especially now consider it as sort of a one brick in the wall of building a wall or building a building or building a foundation, and many ways just a tool that can be helpful in building a company, which I know oftentimes it's sort of a glorified thing, that's the thing that justified everything you did. But I can say with confidence, having gone through it, that IPO is just one tool in building a company, building a product, and getting it in the hands of users. And sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not. Anyways, that happened with Trulia. But in terms of the learnings, obviously, there's a lot of learnings. And I would say, sometimes people say, well, if you fail, you learn a lot. You certainly learn, but I would say it's better to be successful in a traditional sense, because then you at least have one template that was successful. If you fail once, now it's better than having not done anything, but then you have a one template how to fail, and replicating that, it's more likely to be wrong than replicating a template that was successful. I think there's quite a few things we got right with Trulia, so let me try to think about a few things that I've applied at Virta. So one is A+ in everything. That's kind of my mindset. And I think of it like building a successful company out of scratch. It's kind of like trying to win an Olympic gold. It's possible, but extremely unlikely. And if you think of an athlete who wants to win Olympic gold, you want the best coach, the best environment where you train, best massage therapist, best nutritionist, best everything. And it kind of compounds 1%, it's like 1.1 times 1 times and so forth. So it's everything compounds. But to win the Olympic gold, you can't have B- in anything. So I think that's one mindset we applied at Trulia. And I've done the same at Virta. And practically that means you want to hire the very best people you have access to. You want to have the very best advisors you can have. You want to have the very best customers, partners early. You want to have the very best investors. And if you settle into the B- in anything, sometimes you have to, the probability of success is so much lower. So that's one thing, sort of A+ in everything is one lesson that I took. Let's see. Another one, which I got a little bit wrong, but now I've applied it slightly differently at Virta, is it's very important, particularly as a founder and a CEO or executive, like I'm a CEO at Virta now, is to realize that you feel that you have 1,000 things to do every day. It's true. But guess what? About 998 of those things that feel absolutely necessary, really at the end of a 5-year horizon or 10-year horizon, don't mean that much. So you have to be able to sort of almost like I take a step back constantly and say, what are the one or two things that truly make a difference that I, as a founder or CEO, can really make a difference? I was sort of trying to do everything way too much during the Trulia years. And so I think I've taken a little bit different approach now at Virta. First of all, you have less stress, you're more focused, and you can then allocate your time on the most important things. So that's kind of the second thing I would say, learnings from Trulia. And then the third one, I will say, this is something I missed quite a bit at Trulia, which is defining the mission and create a purpose for the company that you can crisply communicate to employees, future employees, investors, yourself. This is embarrassing to say. This is very important, but this is embarrassing to say. If you ask me, so what was Trulia's mission? I still can't tell you. I can say we wanted to build a product to solve a problem of finding a home for sale or home to live or home to buy or home to rent. But sort of the greater, it's just, I didn't crystallize that to myself. And to some extent, I even started losing my own motivation later, sort of like, well, we'll build the product. We are hundreds of millions in revenue. Company has gone public. It's kind of like done. Now at Virta, our mission is reverse type 2 diabetes in 100 million people. That's it. It's been since we started. I tell that to every person like here. If I'm recruiting someone, to investors, to myself even. Sometimes you're lost in thought in the spreadsheet and why am I doing this? And it's like, late night and I'm dealing with this spreadsheet and it's like, okay, why am I doing this? Well, we want to reverse diabetes in 100 million people. So those are some of the learnings, some that I've applied directly and some that are kind of, I've learned how to do things better the second time around.
Well, all three of those things resonate with me significantly. First, I think, a founder and a leader has to lead from the top and everything kind of cascades down. So if you show purpose and you have a strong passion for the mission, typically you're going to attract other people, that are going to be able to do that. And I don't know if you know this, my team and my firm has worked with your company. We've probably placed a half dozen people, and that mission is what resonates with people. Hey, why should I talk to Virta over all these other companies, that I get pinged on LinkedIn for? And I say, well, this company is going to try to and will eventually help 100 people reverse their diabetes. Or
100 million.
Entirely.
100 million.
Sorry, 100 million. 100 million. Sorry. You're well past 100,000. My mistake. Thank you for correcting me. And that usually gets people really fired up and really excited and, really engaged. So I think that's great. I think the learning to delegate and learning how to prioritize things is really important. There's 1,000 things to do. Probably 998 can be outsourced and can be done by other people without a huge gap in, ability to do the task. And then there's a couple things that maybe you can only do, or you do just better than most, where you're really performing at top of license as much of your time as possible. So I think that's important for really any business leader at any level of a company. It doesn't even have to be the CEO. It can be, top line managers and so forth. And then I think the high standards piece is just really important. Once employees see that, hey, mediocre or above average or even good or very good is enough, that's the standard, that's going to cut it, you're already selling yourself short. Unless it's, hey, we're the best at everything and that's the standard, anything less and you do not fit the culture, I think that's a really strong precedent and a great precedent to set at a company with ambitions like yours, especially mission-driven ones. So I really, it's great to hear that because I've seen it and, it's been very effective. Tell me a little bit about some of the similarities between general tech and digital health, and what are the major differences? When you started Virta and started building Virta, when did you realize hey, this digital health market's a tad unique? There are certain intricacies about it that just work differently than the typical tech business.
Yeah, that is a very good question. And now about, let's say, 9 years into the journey, with Virta as a telemedicine company and strong technology foundation. It is different. It's quite different from my experience with Trulia. And there's a lot of things, but I guess, let's see, maybe I'll start from the obvious and then try to think about as I speak the more nuanced things. So the one obvious thing is, we are a provider and provider-led company and reversing type 2 diabetes. To state the obvious, we have human lives, their health in our hands. That is very different level of responsibility, ethically and legally, than trying to help someone find a home to buy online. So the responsibility that we have and the margin for error that we can have, it's a whole different level of carefulness that we have to apply to processes, to product, what we launch, how much we test before, and just so that's kind of a one thing to realize, that to take this Mark Zuckerberg's old quote that people have butchered and given him a hard time many times, move fast and break things. Guess what? If you do that in healthcare, somebody could die. Somebody could die. And so that's kind of the one thing, is to stating the obvious. Related to that, the second point is there's a different level of regulation in terms of, let's just say, HIPAA or PHI, personal health information. How do you have to protect it? So the time and the cost and the investment that you need in your software stack to be able to treat one patient or sign a commercial contract with a large self-insured employer or health plan. You have a consumer internet company, you whip up an app that's crashing all the time, you can put it in App Store and you call it beta and you iterate and you have one software developer and it's out. So the regulation is the second one. That's very different. The third one that relates to those and then also relates to selling to customers is the pace at which you can move, and you should move perhaps. It's just so much slower than a consumer internet company. So I'll just give you an example, like, the typical venture funded companies, it's sort of 18-month cycles. You raise money every 18 months, you need to hit certain milestones to get to the next fundraising round and so forth. Well, a sales cycle with a large customer, if you're leveraging this type of B2B2C model, it can be 18 months. So, you raise capital and you're like, exactly. I'm still selling to the first prospect. So good luck raising another round of fundraising. And then I think that lastly, I would say one huge difference that honestly I had to learn kind of a hard way, and now it seems very obvious, is this. As a leader, you always have to break silos internally in the company. And you want to create one culture. You want to create cohesion. You want to create silo busting. You just want one team, like we call one dream, one team. Guess what? A software engineer who's used to changing things and shipping code on a weekly basis versus, say, and I'm not throwing anyone under the bus here, I'm just kind of illustrating, a medical doctor who has educated themselves for, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, memorizing every little detail, and like clinical guidelines say change annually or once a decade. And they have very different life and professional experience. You bring them together, and software engineers like, yeah, we're going to be shipping code on a weekly basis and changing things to see how it works. And then you have a medical doctor who says, no, you practice medicine and never make a mistake, and things may change once a decade. Bringing those types of personalities together to create something together, ship something together, and succeed together was much harder than I thought. And I had to pay way more attention to it. And I certainly had my challenges and still have my challenges. And so I think that's one big difference in a consumer internet company where kind of everyone comes from the same background. What's fast is kind of the same for everyone. And then in a healthcare tech company, it's like, whoa, very, very different. And so there's a lot of differences. And so I'll just finish by saying one thing. All this leads into one symptom of this may be shocking. So Trulia, we raised $33 million of equity from zero to IPO. 33 million. I felt that was a lot of money.
And it
I
was a
raised,
multi-billion-dollar exit.
yeah, it's $3 billion exit.
Yep.
Oh, or merger then with Zillow Group. I've raised $360 million of equity capital to Virta today. And I don't take it lightly. I consider it a mortgage that I have to pay back. We have to pay back with 10x return. But that's the difference, 33 million versus 360. It's just the one kind of an end result of these differences in industry. That's very difficult to build a healthcare tech company to scale and IPO and beyond with, 5 million or 10 or 33 million of capital. And some of those reasons I mentioned are behind that fact. So lots of differences.
You're in a very small group. I don't know how many others have done it, but like someone who co-founded a tech company that went unicorn status and a digital health company that went unicorn status. I think you might be one of the only. I don't know who else is in that category, but I would say this. There are a lot of tech background people that have tried it in this space and have failed. And I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus, as you said. But let's talk even about companies. Like, let's look at Amazon. They invested God knows how much money in Amazon Care. They, acquired One Medical. They've done some major investment. We'll see how it works. Amazon Care did not perform as well as anyone had expected to initially. Maybe there's another iteration of that, but their first attempt I would call a failure. Same thing with, look at Google. Google was big investors in Verily and on Duo. I think those have been, generally somewhat successful, but none of them complete home runs. They've acquired Fitbit, and I don't know how much they've done, since then. So like there's big companies, Fortune 10 companies, that have invested massive dollars into this space, and they're finding it really hard to navigate. So first, testament to you of like being able to pick it up and, go through those challenges, because there are bigger organizations, with more money in their pockets that have tried and either had medium level of success to utter failure. And those companies have plenty of intellectual horsepower, within them. So credit to you and your team at Virta and any others, who I omitted that were also in your small category of success on both sides of the fence. We'd love to interview you later in the podcast series. So on my first episode, I had Michael from EHIR as a guest, and he name dropped you. I don't know if you listened to that podcast, but he was glowing in his praise of your fitness prowess. He mentioned you've, gone on ultra marathons and run, in high altitude. You've done rowing competitions where you've rowed like in the ocean for, hundreds of miles. Can you walk me through your fitness regimen and like what your health journey has been, over these last handful of decades?
Yeah, well, yeah, thank you. Thanks for the kind words. And I would also say to your earlier comment, I always say internally, it's always day one, which I think I've copied from Jeff Bezos or whoever was the first, meaning that we have to be very humble, and certainly still at Virta, everything's relative. I think we're over the first hump in terms of where the company can go and the impact we've had. But it's too early to say that we've been highly successful, but I appreciate those kind words. So have to stay humble, and it's always day one. But in terms
brag
of the,
for you, don't worry.
Yeah, well, sure, thanks. In terms of the exercise routine, well, let's see. I would say one thing that I grew up on a farm in Finland, and manual labor was I was the manual labor with my parents, so I had to do a lot of work. So that kind of manual work, some level of exercise has always been part of my DNA, and I've done endurance sports all my life, grew up as a cross-country skier. And so for me, exercising, say, hour and a half every morning, and mostly it's sort of endurance sports style, has been my church, my mental health, and just something I enjoy that I've been doing for 30 plus years. And so basically I exercise 1 hour to hour and a half every morning, sometime between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m., Monday through Friday. and then Saturday and Sunday 2 to 4 hours per day. And that may sound like a lot, but because I do a lot of cycling, you can actually do that. So I always do that, and I've been doing that for 30 years. Then I have a difference between what I call exercising and training. And so I always do the same amount, more or less, but there's a huge difference between exercising. I just go and, spin my bike for an hour and a half or do a 1 hour run. And then when I'm training, it's very focused intervals and specific hard workouts and recovery workouts and so on. And, I've done 7 Hawaii Ironman World Championships, and I've won the World Championships in my age group. And like you mentioned, rode across the Pacific Ocean with my wife actually in 2014 from California to Hawaii. And so I performed at a pretty high level in sports, in competitions, in addition to, building companies and being a CEO and having a busy life. I personally could not do it in any other way. And we can talk about why. And as a kind of a spoiler, I would say to me, it's, if you are not physically strong and healthy, I don't understand how I could perform intellectually at the best level. And I don't know how anybody else can. So there's that element to me. And then, like, how many founders have burnout? And I empathize with them. I'm not saying, it's a sign of weakness, but it's sad. It is your job to try to maximize your chances of being able to withstand any kind of hardship intellectually and emotionally. And I find that having that another outlet, besides my family and my kids, as a kind of identity as an athlete, is extremely helpful. So that when I have a stressful day or week or month or year, as a CEO or founder, it's not all that I have. And so I found that this kind of yin and yang, physical and sports and exercising, is incredibly helpful. And obviously it's an N=1 experiment, so I can't say how much it's just, I'm just making up a story. But I do know that if I've been sick or something and I haven't been able to exercise or train, I just start deteriorating in terms of my happiness and joy and ability to take the little stress that comes with work. So yeah, sports is a big part of my life, and I can't see any other way actually.
And talk to me a little bit more about your health journey and what gave you the inspiration to start Virta in the first place.
Yeah, so for those who don't even know Virta, maybe just as a context, so again, our mission, reverse diabetes in 100 million people, and we are a telemedicine company, and we achieve these quite remarkable results in health outcomes, literally just through nutrition and behavior change. But how did this come about? It was totally accidental. So I mentioned I co-founded Trulia, was a consumer internet company. My background is all in kind of software and studied physics. So there's really nothing healthcare related. So I was not walking around thinking, when can I start a diabetes reversal company? That was not. And after Trulia, I was like, all right, I'm done. I've built a company and maybe I'll become an angel investor, because apparently that's a job in Silicon Valley. I don't know what those people do, but it sounded cool. So maybe I'll become one of them. But everything changed to me when, despite being a world-class endurance athlete and lean and doing all these things and exercise being a big part of my life, like I mentioned, I discovered that I was actually pre-diabetic and on my way to developing type 2 diabetes. And this was 2011, 2012. I was probably at the peak of my sports performance, I might say. And it was just mind-blowing to me, wait a second. I always thought obesity and type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetes, they go hand in hand. It's a disease of lack of willpower. And I'm the opposite. I'm the absolute opposite, because I exercise, I have all the willpower in the world. You tell me to eat X, I eat X. Tell me to eat nothing, I eat nothing. But yet now I was one of them, developing pre-diabetes and on the way to type 2 diabetes. So that kind of opened my eyes, and I was like, wait a second. there's something here that's not matching up with my expectations and maybe society's expectations, that type 2 diabetes is just lazy people who eat too much. And so there were many steps after that, but I stumbled on a couple of scientists who had been doing research on this for a long time, and they're like, nothing surprising. There's novel science in terms of how to use nutrition to address type 2 diabetes, not just address, potentially reverse. And I just got so excited. I felt, wait a second, these scientists have a key to solving this epidemic. They just need help. And technology and software can help solve how to deliver this treatment and how to support patients and how to do it cost effectively and how to reach millions of people. And I was like, okay, no more retirement, no more angel investment, or no more being an angel investor as a job or whatever identity. Let's go. Like, we can make this happen. So that's kind of what happened. And to tie it back to where we started the conversation, I truly feel that to start a company, you need to unexplainably become obsessed and fall in love with something that you can't even explain. And that basically what happened to me. I felt like, oh my God, we are sitting in a secret. And I sort of stumbled on this even area accidentally. We're sitting on a secret that could help hundreds of millions of people. Most people don't believe it's a secret. Most people have never heard of it. But I feel like I have this unique talent to bring together the science and technology and raise capital and how to build a company and make this seed of an idea grow a giant tree and hopefully save millions of lives in the process. And it was just, life dealt me cards and I felt I had to play the cards, and here we are still playing the hand.
Well, you're helping millions of people, so it's really, awesome to see. Just out of pure curiosity, if you feel comfortable,
Yeah.
like, how did you even get diagnosed for pre-diabetes? Like, what symptoms, or like, were you just doing general blood work and it just kind of popped up unexpectedly? Because like no doctor would look at you and say, "Oh, you're at risk. Let's do some testing."
Blood work, just blood work. And I was tracking my blood work sort of out of curiosity, or as a kind of a preventative thing as an athlete, and I was always interested in, my blood sugars were all running high, fasting blood glucose running high all the time. That's kind of how it was. In terms of symptoms, if you have pre-diabetes, there's little to no symptoms. Now, after the fact, I realized that I was actually metabolically kind of not that healthy, like a lot of inflammation and issues as an athlete, where I was like, well, just take some ibuprofen and everything's inflamed all the time. And there were things, and now that I look at my blood work, it's also like things like triglycerides. It's like, yeah, some of these things are kind of high for an athlete. But you don't, if you're pre-diabetic, by the way, half of American adults, roughly, are pre-diabetic today. It's crazy, like 100 million plus people. Most of them aren't like, oh my God, I have a symptom when I wake up in the morning. So it's more like you're metabolically slowly boiling, and you only see it in blood work. And then like the real consequences usually start hitting once you go beyond the type 2 diabetes threshold. You're peeing a lot and you're sick all the time, and maybe you have tingling in your fingers, and your eyesight starts going, deteriorate and stuff like that. But yeah.
All right. Without getting too personal, my grandma had type 2 diabetes, and my dad for most of his adult life was obese. And when he finally had a doctor tell him, like, if you keep going down this path, you're going to get diabetic, and he saw how his mom suffered through it, he just never wanted that. So, he took, he got gastric bypass. But since he's been, that's 15 years ago, he's like kept the weight off. I'm really proud of him. And, he's definitely increased his life expectancy and his quality of life, by making a big change. So I know a lot of people are impacted by it. And I saw, in my own family, what that did, and, how it changed his life and really all of our lives, since then. So walk me through some of your early successes at Virta. Like, you were new to digital health. I'm sure you entered the market and you're like, what exactly is a benefits broker and consultant? Why exactly do the health plan carriers have something, to say about, whether my prospect buys this solution? What is the PBM, sticking their nose into this thing? There's, a lot of parties that are, kind of included. on some of these buying decisions. What were some of your early successes from a commercial standpoint at Virta, and kind of walk us through some of your first customers?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the amplitude always, especially in the early days, amplitude of feelings of success and failure, it's very high. Like you have those daily, weekly, monthly moments like, oh my God, we're going to take over the world and it's going to be so easy. And then hours later, it's the opposite. So yeah, there were a few of those. Let me just try to think about, although now that I think about 8-9 years later, I'm like, oh my God, it was just so hard and slow. I think, so here's a couple of things that were highlights. One, very early when I teamed up with my co-founders, scientists, Dr. Stephen Finney and Dr. Jeff Volek, before we really had anything, a physician leader from a very large North Carolina, let's keep it unnamed, health system reached out to us inbound, based on the research published by my scientific co-founders and saying, can you come and help us? Your research looks very promising. Can you come and help us with type 2 diabetes and obesity? So this was like late 2014, where we had no outside investors, nothing. And this was purely based on the scientific reputation of my co-founder. So that was sort of one of these moments where I was like, wait a second, this just doesn't happen in the world. Some scientist or scientists, no matter how good your papers are, like a big enterprise reaches out inbound and say, please come and help us. Now, there's a lot of lessons there. We spent a lot of time and cycles trying to help them, and like how to actually operationalize that when we really didn't have much product. And I think our approach was wrong. We're sort of trying to train them as opposed to have a product and say, plug this in and it's going to work. Didn't really work. But that was one of these high moments where I went like, holy shit, there's something here. If people
You can curse
inbound,
on this podcast, just to be
the
very
holy
clear.
shit was my like, whoa, this never happens. So that was exciting. That was a very exciting high point. Obviously, another one was when we got the lab results back from our very, very first patients, that by our definition, we had reversed their type 2 diabetes. We knew it's possible, but seeing their blood sugar come below the type 2 diabetes limit, and we had simultaneously eliminated all the diabetes drugs. It's always what I say is like 0 to 1 is rocket science. 0 to 1 is rocket science. From 1 to million, it's just hard work. And so that was a huge thing. For now, it's freaking hard work. The 1 to million, but I do believe that, it's like the first innovation. Like, can you do something remarkable like that more or less nobody else has done? That's very, very hard. It is very hard. If you make that, and then after that, it should be easier. So that was another high point, and we celebrated big time. And then the third one, the first actual customers, Nielsen, this ratings company, was one of our, I think it was the very first agreement we signed. Maybe it was, I like to say it's around 2018. We had just sort of formally launched, because we actually spent quite a few years doing a prospective clinical trial. So that was a phenomenal, it's exciting when you build something and like a real company says, we want that, we need that could help us, and we're going to start writing checks to you if you work and help us. That was very, very exciting. But I will mention that, I think we got 2 customers first as 2018. And I was like, well, this is going to be easy here. And it is slow to get these B2B customers. Coming to 2020 and COVID, I think we had about 30 customers in like 2 or 3 years. So it was okay, but it's not like a rocket ship. And then COVID hit, we got to about 100 in the first year. So COVID actually became like a tailwind. And I think now we have somewhere between 400 and 500 B2B customers. So it's definitely been
fantastic.
Like it's real now, and sort of like a hockey stick.
Yep.
But those first few years when you're like, oh, you have 2 customers, and then it's like 6 months, nobody else has signed, and it's digital health, B2B2C, patience, capital. You need a lot of patience.
It's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure.
For sure.
How did you and your co-founders decide that going and selling to self-insured employers was like the right customer type?
Yeah. Well, first of all, credit to my co-founders as scientists have been absolutely Dr. Finney and Dr. Volek. We wouldn't exist without them. Now, at the same time, I would say the go-to-market and the business model, for better or worse, fell on my shoulders to kind of decide and figure out how to do. So here was kind of the logic, and I think one of the benefits of having built Trulia before was I'm so obsessed about focus that you can't do two things. You can't even do 1.5 things as a startup. You have to do one thing and do it very well and repeat it a million times. That's the recipe for most companies. So it was very clear to me that we have to choose, first of all, between like sell directly to consumers or have this, which is pretty common in digital health, B2B2C, that the business, the payer, the employer, the health plan, or the government is your customer, and then it's more or less free for the end user. I pretty early decided that our path is the B2B2C, and the reason was sort of two or threefold. One, the amount of money we could save to the payer was so great. We weren't talking about $10 a user a month. We were talking about $200-300, so thousands of dollars per patient per year. And secondly, very easily quantifiable, because if you get people off of insulin, it's not like we need to have a complex discounted cash flow over 10 years. It's like they were on insulin yesterday and today they are off, and you can see. So that was the second reason. The third one was that I've observed that selling vanity in US healthcare is reasonably easy, direct to consumer. So you want to whiten your teeth, straighten your teeth, plastic surgery, I don't know, maybe even weight loss drugs, wink wink, which is now happening. Sells pretty well. But selling life-saving medical treatment, it's not catchy or sexy on Facebook. And we were more like a clinical treatment. So there were a number of these reasons that, to me, kind of pointed heavily towards, if you can make the business work in a P2P2C setting, it's better, it's stickier, better unit economics, distribution is kind of built in with the plans and employers. If you can make it work there, which many businesses cannot, that's what you should choose. So these were some of the reasons I was like all in there. Now we still take patients directly who can come in and pay with their credit card, but it's not like, that's not our growth engine. We're not investing into it. I think it's good to keep the door open for anyone in the world to come in and join as a patient. But that was kind of how we thought of the B2B2C. And I would say it was the right decision. I'm absolutely confident about that. And then secondly, the fact that we decided it on day one allowed us to build the whole DNA of a company, like build a commercial team, go-to-market model, and many of these things that you need to have, product and support and customer success for the B2B customers, we built day one, versus like being a consumer-oriented company or direct-to-consumer, and then there's a lot of these companies that's like, actually to make the business work, we better start selling to Walmarts of the world.
Yeah, well, I'll distill what you just shared down into what I will consider the Sami, go-to-market decision tree. And if it's sexy and really easy, go direct to consumer. If it's based on science and it causes, you need behavior change and discipline and hard work to achieve the result, you got to go commercial. You got to sell to the payers.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And I would then add there, like, if you have the evidence base, the hardcore evidence, both the economic savings and the clinical, that this is real and this has substance, not just sizzle, the B2B2C channel can work and is way more attractive. If you're in the world of selling sizzle, and like step trackers were a good example, and I'm obviously like Fitbit was very successful in many ways, Google acquired. But there definitely was way more sizzle. Like, oh, it's a cool thing. You want to have it. Intuitively, it makes sense. Like, well, it's going to somehow make you healthy and maybe it helps you lose weight. Now, it hasn't really panned out like that. Like, tracking your steps
Well,
hasn't. And so there was a lot of sizzle. So it made total sense to sell direct to consumers, have distribution in retail stores online. And they were very successful. Trying to exclusively go to B2B to C with like little data, little peer review, it's kind of like, well, this is cool, but would be. So I think that's a good example of, I think they made the right choice, given the assets and the background that they had versus what we had, which was peer review papers, very easy to say, person is off insulin, you're saving, I guess we're saving about $500 per user per month. And it works very well in a B2B2C context.
well, sadly, I would say in general, Americans on average tend to cut corners and tend to do the easiest thing. So, using Fitbit as an example, not to pick on them, but I know they had a huge launch with Cleveland Clinic. And my wife's family member, I'm not going to expose her, worked for the clinic. And she told me crazy stories about people attaching their Fitbits to their dogs, people putting their Fitbits in the dryer so it would like move and it would say they did a certain amount of steps to lower their premiums. Like they were doing everything to achieve their step total without actually moving and just sitting on the couch and laughing like, oh yeah, I got cheaper premiums by gaming the system. Like you're only hurting yourself. You're not physically active. You're probably shortening your life expectancy, probably not feeling all that great, but yeah, you saved a few bucks on your healthcare premium. So if there's like ways to game the system, a lot of folks tend to do that. The solutions that actually require effort and some discipline, those are the ones that tend to work, but you got to be invested into it and being able to participate in your own rescue. How has the patient journey changed for a Virta user from 2018 to now?
Yeah, I'll answer this in two ways. In one way, not at all. Meaning the foundational components of our approach and science is exactly the same. Which is to say that we achieve these remarkable type 2 diabetes reversal results, getting people off of insulin, blood sugar down, and weight loss, delivering 12% body weight loss at 1 year and 2 year on an intent to treat basis, which is honestly, it's sort of unheard of. We use the same approach, which is nutrition alone. We don't sell or send food. It's all behavior change, highly individualized. We address insulin resistance by reducing carbohydrate intake. Exercise is only introduced when people want to do that, not because it's required. And so some of these, and there's a lot of nuance and long tail of things, is more or less the same. So that's kind of one way to answer. The other way to answer is, everything has changed. Meaning, we obviously iterate and can iterate the member experience constantly in software, in content, how coaches respond, how our medical providers respond, the tools they use, how can they be more efficient, using AI to give superpowers to our team members. So fundamentals the same, but the manifestation of what do you see in the app, what kind of reminders you get, how we scale our care team, we basically we ship code every week, but not every week is like a big major feature. So fundamentals the same, but the kind of the details change all the time. And the nice thing with what we do is, if you're a pharmaceutical company and you are developing a new molecule, you lock the molecule, you run a clinical trial, basically that molecule, the pill or the injection, is more or less the same for 30 years. You do the one thing, you have the molecule, you test it works. We could call what we do digital medicine, which means that every user that we treat and every piece of data and experience we get back allows us to change the entire package and the offering daily. So it allows this constant iteration, partially because we don't need FDA approval, we're just behavior change and nutrition, so it's not like we need to lock things and lock for 10 years. So we don't need to, the regulatory perspective is better. And then partially because we have this daily feedback loop, so we can change things all the time. And there's all kinds of lessons we've had, like I'll just give you one example, which may resonate with listeners, which is you would think that what we do with nutrition and the fact that people lose a lot of weight, that focus on weight loss early and encouraging people to lose a lot of weight is what we should do. Turns out it's counterproductive. The more we promote weight loss early for our members, the likelier they are to leave and regain the weight on the second half of first year and early second. It's very counterintuitive, but we see it in the data. So we want to tell them how to manipulate their biochemistry through nutrition and sort of completely ignore what happens to your weight. And then they start losing weight without any obsession about it. And that delivers the best results 12 and 18 months later.
That's incredible thing, and it's
and lots of those
something very unique about the human psychology.
It's psychology and biology as well.
Yep, I love that. You've been a very successful founder. You've, at a certain point in your career, been an angel investor. What do you think the crucial traits are that a CEO and founder has to have to be successful? Because there's a lot of founders that are very different. Like, for example, like we got talking because Dan Perez put us in touch. I think you and Dan are very different in certain respects, and then very similar in certain respects. I love Dan. I don't think his fitness regimen's up to yours, sadly, but I don't know whose is. But, you know, there are certain things that like founders have to have, and then there's certain things that, you know, can be very different from very successful people. So can you kind of walk me through what you look for in a founder when you're either, you know, investing as a seed investor or, you know, just giving advice to folks?
Yeah, it is. It is a good question. And, you know, I'm not a professor who's done a lot of research. I have my NE course 1 and bunch of observations from founders and CEOs I backed as an angel investor. I think there's a few things, and I will list them that come to mind. And by the way, I don't know if these are innate or you can learn. So I can't even tell about myself, like what I've learned and what's just, you know, a few wires crossed in my brain. So first one I would say, and I kind of talked about this already, is I do think to be successful on any super long-term project, such as building a company, you have to be unexplainably obsessed and fallen in love with the thing. And so I do look for that. Counter to like, oh, I'm in business school and crypto is cool. I'm going to start a crypto company. Like, go for it. I just don't, it's kind of like if you want to find a spouse and yeah, you can have a spreadsheet for the dates and you analyze every first date you have. But let me tell you, when you fall in love with that one person, you don't need a spreadsheet. You're like, wow, absolutely amazing. I can't wait to meet this person the second time. That's how you want to feel when you start a company or product or project. You're unexplainably obsessed. You read about it on a Saturday morning. You would do it even if you didn't get paid. And by the way, you're likely to fail as a founder anyway. And then probably not get paid anything. So that's the one thing I look at, like, I don't know, some people might call it founder product or market fit, or like this person is just freaking obsessed about that. So that's one thing. Second one is any kind of signs and indications about perseverance and grit in other areas of life, and obviously this obsession about something, it's like a built-in grit. And sometimes that's like people come from humble beginnings and they're used to quote unquote hard work, and they just love being in the game. So fair weather founders, I hate that. Like you're just not gonna give up. Like it's not gonna work. So second is perseverance and grit that I look at. Third one I would say it's just some level of ethics and groundedness. Like if there's any sign of too much on the spectrum of a hustler where it's like this person is going to cut corners, I think it's very dangerous, because eventually things will catch up. And yeah, it's just, and by the way, I don't want to associate myself with people who end up in jail or end up in hot water. So I would say that's a third one. And then maybe the last one is, I think there's an over obsession about sort of IQ and how smart, and people like to throw those things around, particularly in Silicon Valley. I do think intellect and curiosity is important, but the kind of over fetishizing, like, oh, this is the smartest person I've ever met, I don't think that's the most important thing.
Yep.
You need certain level of intellect, but the kind of, if you're just intellectualizing too much, you're running circles in your brain, and you just need to get shit done if you're a founder.
Yeah.
But I do look at that kind of curiosity and intellect at some level. Those are some of the things that I think are very important. And then maybe the last thing I'll mention is, and this is also when I hire people, especially early, is ability to somehow solve chicken and egg problems. Because there's no obvious solution. And like the most obvious early is like, well, if I don't have a product or prototype, I can't raise money. Well, if I don't have money, I can't hire developers or founder early employees who can build the prototype. Or I can't get a customer unless I have a reference, but I can't get a reference unless I get a customer. Like everything's a chicken and egg. And as a founder, you just have to be solving those all the time.
Yep.
And if you get stuck with those chicken and egg problems, you're stuck on day one. And so I think founders and sort of entrepreneurial minded people, they make those happen. And I've always wanted to surround myself with those types of people, in particularly in the early days.
Well, that's great advice to founders, to people who are thinking about becoming a founder, to even investors. I think that's great. I would say, based on the things you mentioned, number one, I'd take EQ over IQ all day. Like if you have both, you're going to be really successful. But if I had to choose one, like I think emotional intelligence and ability to, really impact and persuade and like get people to join you is really important. And you can't really do that without understanding people's motivations and being a good listener and all those things. So I think that's great. And then the thing you mentioned about like the spreadsheets and going on dates and marriage, like I ended up marrying a woman that, on my spreadsheet, it's, this is kind of a funny joke. I was in like a singles issue of a local magazine, like many, many years ago, 10 years ago. And a huge joke was that on the pet peeves, like what you're not looking for in someone is picky eater. And my wife is the pickiest eater known to man. You'd be very proud of, her diet. She eats like every vegetable and every fruit imaginable. That's like 95% of her diet. It's like purely just like plants in their whole food form. But anyways, like if I would have said that's a deal breaker, I wouldn't have gone on a date with my wife, and I wouldn't have, been very happily married with a beautiful daughter and a beautiful life. And I don't think I would be where I'm at in my career without like a supporting counterpart who's really, been a great calming presence to my intensity. So we balance each other out well. So I think it's just funny that you mentioned that, because I've, dealt with that personally as well, where, sometimes it's just a feeling, it's not just like, data to crunch. So it's really good advice. Well, again, Sami, really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us on the podcast and getting into the ring with me on the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast. Really appreciate the time. Great insights shared, and congrats on all your success and Virta's success. And I wish you many more successes to come. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Norm, and good luck with the podcast. I love what you're doing, and keep charging forward.
It's been fun. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining. Please like, comment, and subscribe below if you enjoyed it.